RealAgriculture.com, we have Andrew Dickson, General Manager of the Manitoba Pork Council. Andrew, you're fresh off a plane from Washington, D.C. You were part of the Canadian delegation down there talking about country of origin labeling. How did this round of meetings go?
I wasn't able to participate on the Tuesday of this week, but I was there definitely on Wednesday morning. It's been a two-day session that was primarily led by the federal government through Minister Ritz, but Minister Olson came from Alberta as well. And so it was a series of different types of meetings. I mean, we met with the various members of our allies in the United States, the various coalitions that are coming around trying to get mandatory country of origin labeling changed. We also, both the Canadian Cattlemen's Association and the Canadian Pork Council, met with some different members of the House of Representatives and the Senate in terms of their political staff groups. These are the people who actually sit down and actually write legislation and give it to their members and so on. So these are critical people to talk to. And we also wanted to get a sense of direction of what's happening. Well, how do they see this thing unfolding? I think most people are pretty aware that there's a real possibility that the U.S. will lose its appeal at the WTO case, the appeal case that's going to happen in about a week's time in Geneva. I will be there with Canada Pork Council as part of the industry team that's supporting the federal government on this. And so that report will probably come out sometime in May, hopefully, if not earlier. And at that time, and if the U.S. is lost, then Canada and Mexico will be in a position to ask for authority to apply retaliatory measures against products from the United States into both countries. And there's a list being published in Canada of the types of products already. So this has created quite a lot of consternation in certain circles in the United States. So the question then became well, if nobody wants these retaliatory measures to come in, because essentially what it means is there won't be companies in the United States will stop shipping products into Canada because they can't sell their products with these measures in place. So and then what happens next? So we have to have amending legislation, and it has to go through the two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then you need proponents for these. So someone has to stand up and propose legislation, and in doing that, they have to make sure they've got enough support in the proposal, because they don't want to be sitting there and proposing something and the thing gets defeated right away. This is not what we want to see happen. So there's over 500 people sitting in the House of Representatives, and there's about 100 senators, and they all have different opinions on these things. And the Canadian concept of party is not necessarily the same in the United States. And so a lot of these are independent actors, even though they're declared members of a particular party. So they tend to have their own views and tend to vote somewhat independently. So we're going to have to rely on significant help from our American allies in terms of trying to sort of herd this group together to make sure we get the appropriate amending legislation. Now, we fully understand there's going to be opposition to this thing, and there's a number of people who support COOL, and the National Farmers Union in the United States. There's various consumer groups that purport to support this, but you will have to see how this unfolds.
Do you feel that the Canadian argument is gaining momentum?
Oh yeah, I think the vast majority of people recognize that this needs to be amended. The ones we've talked to anyway. There's a small minority that are very supportive of it, but it's our feeling is that if everything goes right, we should have this resolved by the end of the year. The problem's going to be is that we may be putting retaliatory measures in place as Canada and Mexico, and the U.S. legislative process could get bunged up. And so we may be a period in there where retaliatory measures are in place while the legislators are trying to figure out how to amend this legislation. The key thing here is we don't want them amending the legislation and we end up in a worse situation than what we've got right now. Because the key thing to us is to get rid of this segregation of live animals. If we can get that out of the way, a lot of our issues will have been resolved.
Do you see there being any way of doing this without or before retaliatory measures are implemented?
Well, hopefully, if we get the WTO report early and the U.S. government recognizes that legislation needs to be brought forward, there'll be a meeting of minds, and they'll find an appropriate legislative vehicle to attach amending legislation to, and then this could get passed through the House, both houses. Their legislative process in Capitol Hill is very different from ours, and we have to recognize that. And it takes time.
Do we get into U.S. election territory and some of those?
Well,
offices?
People have to remember the House of Representatives, they have 2-year terms, and many of them are in constant election mode. And a third of the Senate changes every so often, and so we don't want to be in the middle of a presidential campaign. And there's considerations in Canada. I mean, there's a real possibility there's going to be a federal election this year, and so that might have an impact on the ability of the federal government to work in this area. So there's a number of deadlines coming up this year that need to be carefully managed.
Are there any unintended consequences that could arise for Canadian producers if we implement these tariffs?
Well, the issue for us always is that if we put tariffs on American products, like pork products coming into Canada, and the U.S. has captured about a third of our domestic market, or had captured about a third, what is going to happen to that product? They'll have to find markets for it somewhere else, and if they don't, we don't want a surplus of American pork in the American domestic market. That'll push down prices, and of course our prices are based entirely on the American model. In other words, the national base price in the United States, which is a combination of the price in southern Minnesota and Iowa. So we are very dependent on the United States on this thing. So we have to be very careful we don't end up shooting ourselves in the foot, to be blunt.